Excellent. All right. So as Chrissy said, I'm Lauri, and a couple of years ago, I was given a challenge to do a presentation on a weed. So I kind of looked around and thought, oh my gosh, I had to do this presentation on a weed. I mean, how long can you talk about a weed, right? So I'm looking around and I'm looking up some different weeds, and I stumbled on this really funny article about dandelions, and I thought, all right, that's my start. I'm going to do dandelions. I started researching, and it was actually really exciting and interesting, and some fun little facts about it because truly the story of the dandelion is so interwoven with our story as humans and what we've done over the generations and the eons that I just thought it'd be really fun to share that with everybody. So here we go. So this is a taxonomy of the dandelion. You can see it is a perennial herbaceous plant, and it grows in places that where there's disturbed soil. It does love the sun. It goes into the northern temperate zones. So it's actually on every continent on the planet except for Antarctica. And a lot of that is because of humanity dragging it along with them on their adventures into new places and explorations. It does grow year round. I know, especially up here in the Northeast, it doesn't seem like it does, but it truly does. It just kind of dies back for the winter, but that root is alive and well. And that's why in the spring, as soon as things warm up, you see those pretty yellow flowers popping up, or some people think those icky yellow weeds popping up. You can see here that the taproot is very long. You guys, hopefully you can see my arrow. Here's your taproot, very long, has all these little branches on it. So if you go in and break it off, say right here, when you pull it up, you could potentially have 1, 2, 3, 4 new plants coming up. It will survive with a quarter an inch of the root still left in the ground. All of the leaves and the flowers actually come right out of the root. That's what you're seeing right here. It just pops right up and starts blooming, and it will split up again. If you cut this off, it'll start growing another thing off of it. What you think of as the flower is these are all individual petals. So kind of like a carnation, all these individual petals. And then here are your littler, smaller leaves that hold it in place. So that's the basics of that in the taxonomy. They are the masters of survival. They definitely can grow just about anywhere. I'm sure you've seen them in some really unique places. I kind of find that miraculous how they can survive and how they can go from a place that's been disturbed and has nothing to being the beginning of everything. So let's look at the dandelion's name. Think about that. Dandelion. Where do you think it comes from? There are so many stories. But one of the most common ones that we hear about is that it's based on the canine teeth of a lion. In French, dandelion is the French phrase for teeth of the lion. So I got two pictures up here. You can see both of them. The other one's some sheets hanging out. That is the other name it has, pissenlit, which is the plant, name for the plant, because dandelions are diuretics. So when you take a diuretic, you tend to urinate quite a bit, get some fluid out of your body. And if you would eat a lot of dandelion products before bed, it would cause you to piss on lint or wet your bed. So that is where lion's teeth and wet bed sheets come together to talk about the same thing. They also have been named things based on the sap that's inside the plants. If you open up a stem, you see a very milky substance in there. So it's called the milk pot or dog milk, sow milk. And it's also had some things called, they are translated as blowing flower from some of the Asian countries, because obviously when it turns a seed, you can blow it away. I see a hand raised. Does someone have a question? No? All right. Chris, did you have a question? I see your hands raised. Okay, I'll move
No,
on.
that's unintentional. Sorry.
All right, no worries. All good. So I love this picture. How a dandelion in the middle of a movie from the Ice Age. And it is true, dandelions have been around since the Ice Age. They actually adapted as the Ice Age, as the ice started receding in that disturbed soil. One of the very first plants that was there was the dandelion. And they spread and spread and spread as those glaciers retreated. Because like I mentioned before, they love that disturbed soil. That's where they start. Eventually, humans and dandelions moved and spread as the Ice Age glaciers retreated, and they moved on. Dandelions are a pioneer plant, so a formal name for that are rootedels, and they are the first plants, like I just mentioned, to colonize those disturbed lands. Dandelions do have a deep root in history. Throughout the ages, ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, they all enjoyed the flower. The Chinese used it in traditional medicine for over 1,000 years. They were used in first aid kits. They were used in art. They were used in dyeing. So, like in this picture of the Egyptians here, some of this material on here, it's just one of the things that there's many things that can dye things yellow, but dandelions were used to make a yellow dye for things and for painting on walls. The healing arts go back, but it's like tracing, like tracing the history of the dandelion. It's basically like chasing those dandelion seeds floating over our yards. You really can't find the total history of them, but they have been using them as medicine and arts since the olden times. They've been prescribed for every ailment from warts to the plague. So, how did that all work? That's really an interesting thing, and we're going to delve into that. The Greeks actually wrote about the dandelion. So this picture here that I have the arrow on, that's a minotaur. For anybody who doesn't know, that is a half man, half bull that demanded the sacrifice of 7 Athenian youths and 7 maidens drawn by lots every 7 years. So as you can imagine, that was quite terrifying to that culture. But there was a brave warrior named Theseus who was the first to defeat the Minotaur. And how he did that was eating dandelions for 30 days to fortify him for battle. This story became embraced by the Greek culture, and their soldiers were often fed dandelions before they went into battle to fortify them for those battles. And they believed that it made them stronger and they could defeat their enemy. Yes, I want to be unmuted. How did I get muted? Interesting. Anyways, can you guys hear me still? All right, great. So the dandelion has been carried from place to place since written history. These things may have gotten on someone's shoe and traveled accidentally, but it was very purposeful to travel with the dandelion seeds. They wanted to take them with us as they expanded their territories. They can be found in Roman times. They found them in Roman ruins. They have been noted in Anglo-Saxon tribes of Britain and the Normans of France, and they're mentioned for medicinal purposes by the Arabian physicians in the 10th century. That's quite a long history of being used and loved, not just being there and existing, but actually being embraced by humanity. So the new world, for finally to us, right? We've left Europe now and left the ancient times, and we're in the new world. They came not as stowaways. They didn't come in the pilgrim's hat or the pilgrim shoes or attached to another plant. They were purposely brought here because they knew that it was a valuable food source and a valuable medicinal source. So they brought it with them. They cultivated it. They actually, opposite of us, would rip out grass to make room for the dandelion. Quite the change, right? So I love this little fairy guy. So they actually call this one the fairy sundials is another nickname for the dandelion. And it comes from the fact that the dandelion opens up at the first light and closes up as the sun sets. It's the first to flower in the spring and the last to flower in the fall. It actually goes dormant and kind of a little bit dormant in the summer where it doesn't flower as much, but then the fall it starts to bloom again. It prefers the sensitivity of the land. They talk about how for outdoorsmen, they would look and see, and if the fluffy, when it starts to turn to seed, if the dandelion would actually protect its seed head by closing up, it meant rain was coming. And as it started to open again, they knew the skies were going to clear. So it was a little weather barometer for them. I thought that was really cool to learn. And so I actually last year kind of looked outside and watched my dandelions. And I noticed too that they actually track the sun. So it's kind of cool to watch them move around their little flower heads, and you kind of know where the sun is, even on a cloudy day. They kind of set you in the right direction. So I thought that was pretty neat to see. So the dandelion's war effort. How does a little tiny yellow flower that we think is a nuisance weed actually contribute to the war? Well, in 1942, Japan controlled 90% of the world's natural rubber production. So as World War II started, interestingly enough, before then, the US, which is so common for us, right? We used over half the world's supply of rubber. So our country was using quite a bit of rubber, and now we were cut off from it. A single military airplane could use a half a ton of rubber. Tanks used a ton, and battleships used 75 tons of rubber. So you can imagine that an army without access to rubber would not be victorious. And America likes to be victorious just like any country does. So what were we going to do? There was no rubber that we could get because Japan had control of it. And before that, it was actually really expensive because in 1922, the British placed export restrictions and increased the price of rubber because they were working with the Japanese in the rubber factories. So they decided to come up with an idea, and they started researching and trying to find a way to get huge quantities of rubber. And guess what? Here comes that little dandelion. That material, that liquid, that milky liquid inside of the dandelion stems is latex. And this latex is actually 50% heavier than the rubber that comes out of a rubber tree. So it was a really good source for very strong, superior rubber to be made for tires. But dandelion's a lot smaller than a tree, right? I mean, it doesn't grow. The biggest dandelions out there can only grow to be 2 feet, and rubber trees go to be about 50 feet. So they had to figure out a way to mass produce these dandelions and be able to access the latex inside and process it to make the rubber for the war effort. So they started disturbing lands, planting dandelion seeds, and got these big dandelion farms going and started a factory up to try and get the latex to process quickly. And what happened? The war ended. War ended. Japan was defeated. Now they were selling the rubber from those rubber trees at a really cheap price. So it wasn't really worth the effort anymore to keep researching how to use the dandelion. But it's a great story about how the dandelion did enter the war effort and try and help us produce rubber. But that's only one story. I have another story for you. And this is by a man named Henry T. Chamberlain. He grew up during the Depression, where his mom lost her job and couldn't pay the rent. So the family actually moved into a tent on the grounds of the Nebraska Territorial Capitol building, which for anybody who lived out in Nebraska, it's now where the Omaha Central High School is. Each day they would pick dandelions in the grounds and they would boil them and eat them up to stop from starving. Eventually, Roosevelt started the New Deal and slowly the economy came back, and Chamberlain's dandelion days seemed to be over. But wait, on his 18th birthday, he enlisted in the army, and under Japanese control, Chamber found himself a prisoner in the #1 Katabanan prison camp, assigned as a medic in a hut adjacent to the camp hospital, known as Zero Ward. And for anybody who knows any history about World War II, Zero Wards are where they send the weak and very sick prisoners to die. They don't bother feeding them or giving them anything because it's not worth wasting medicine or food on these dying prisoners. And oftentimes the only way anybody survived from Zero Ward was by sheer willpower. But good old Chamberlain, he remembered his Depression childhood and he noticed there was a profusion of dandelions outside Zero Ward, where several American prisoners were. So he told the men that were strong enough to get out of bed to let them start to blossom and then pick them, pick the seeds, pick the flowers. Just don't pull them up. Just pull the leaves off them, eat the seeds, eat the flowers. And they did, and they survived. The greatest number of surviving prisoners from a zero camp ward were from the camp where Chamberlain was. And that was because there's so much protein and nutrients in a dandelion. So I think that's pretty impressive that a dandelion saved so many soldiers from our country and also wanted to help out with the rubber production. So that's the war story for you. Look at this. Look at this beautiful drawing of dandelions. They're really beautiful flowers. I think they're gorgeous. I love their brilliant yellow color and the way their stems. And even when you look over here at the ones that are starting to fade before they turn to seed, they're actually really pretty too. They are very common and beloved. And when I lived in Japan, I discovered at the time, and I thought it was odd because back then I kind of thought of dandelions as weeds myself. There are actually whole horticultural societies formed to enjoy the beauty of dandelions, and they actually have developed new varieties, variegated varieties, large varieties, miniature varieties, almost bonsai varieties. So there's a lot of love for the dandelion in a lot of places. In the New World, when our ancestors came here, the cheerful face of dandelion was a sweet reminder of home. So they also did a lot of paintings of dandelions for their homes when they had the time, just to remind them, even in the winter, of the warmth of the dandelion and the memories of home. You can go and see in several museums across the world, art museums, you'll see artwork of dandelions. Dandelions are also a lot of fun to do photography of. I mentioned earlier that I was in a field one day and just taking picture after picture after picture. This, unfortunately, is not one of mine, but it's the one that inspired me on a dewy morning to try to get a beautiful picture of the dandelions with the dewdrops on them. So this is my goal, to someday take a picture much like this. Haven't got there yet, but they're great for photography. So think about it. I mean, dandelions nourish our bodies and they nourish our souls. And they also nourish the soil because those tap roots go down and they break up the soil and they bring nutrients up. So how do we go? Like I said, the dandelions, they do so much for our land and for us. So how did they go from hero to zero practically overnight? Well, I'm sure you guys can guess. It's the obsession with lawns. We all want these beautiful, beautiful lawns. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second and look at the chats. Looks like there's a couple questions. Yes, very much like a hydra. Absolutely. And pollinators love them. We're going to talk about how important they are as pollinators here later in our presentation. And the definition of a weed. My definition of a weed is something growing where you don't want it to. Because there are things that are valuable. You can't say it's invasive because it's not, but a weed, in my opinion, if someone has a better technical, especially like Christy, if you know a formal definition of a weed, but that's mine, something growing where you don't want it to. All right, so the obsessions with lawns. How did we start this obsession with lawns? Well, it actually goes back to the time of agriculture in our country, where we always used the land around our homes to grow things. We needed to supply ourselves with food and nutrients. If you were wealthy, you didn't have to do that. So it became a sign of wealth that you were so wealthy that you didn't need to grow anything on that lawn. You could just leave it be and have it be unproductive for you. And in fact, you could even use staff, servants, slaves, whatever it was, to groom that piece of land that produced nothing. And for anybody who doesn't know, a blade of grass has zero nutrients for us, no benefit for us at all. It looks really pretty. So there was actually a woman named Sarah Mickle, and she did a huge project on community engagement. It's called the Land Conservancy of McHenry, and she said that it was a sense of pride, and that when people got their homes and they could put a lawn in, it was a sense of pride, and they would actually look down on people who had to use that land to farm. So this concept kindly took hold. And I remember as a child, and probably a lot of you do too, my yard was full of weeds. I would go out and there was clover and plantains and dandelions and whatever. And then these chemicals came about where you could spray your lawn and have a beautiful green grass with no weeds. And now it's an ownership thing. And you'll have neighbors complain if somebody has weeds. And instead of being a beautiful thing to have all these weeds in the yard that are edible and full of nutrients, it makes you look like they assume you're lazy or you don't care about your yard. And people actually could become judged for lacking the means to maintain their yards. So 0 to hero in basically a generation. But what many people don't realize is the dandelions are good for your lawn. They're really good. They're super healthy for your lawn. Not even talking about us or the animals. Those roots, they loosen up hard packed soil. They aerate the earth. They reduce erosion. The deep tap roots pull nutrients up like calcium from the soil and make it available to other plants. And while they're actually, some people think of them as lawn killers, they're actually fertilizer for our lawn. The great thing about dandelions is there's no ecological impact. They don't cause any damage to the ecosystem. They're actually, as you well know, very difficult to exterminate. So they're where you don't want them to be, then they can cause some damage. But that's more because you're trying to kill them. But they in themselves are willing to grow anywhere with minimal care, and all they do is benefit the soil. They're a low threat to our ecosystem. They don't put anything toxic into it unless you're trying to kill them. But again, we think of them as a weed and we want to destroy them. So here we go. Someone mentioned earlier about the pollinators. Yes, they are a huge benefit. I raise honeybees and I see them first thing in the spring. They are looking for those dandelions because it's one of the first things to bloom in the spring, and they are all over the dandelions in my yard. I have a little sign up that says, "Excuse the weeds, I'm feeding the bees." I do not feel bad about those dandelions because they don't only feed the bees, they feed me and they feed other animals. So you can look here. If you look at this bee, this right here, this is all the nectar and pollen here, and then here's all the pollen all over their little things. Dandelion's loaded with it. It has so much nutrients for our bees. And we all know, right? We've learned this with master naturalists that if we don't have bees, there's a lot of food we don't have. We need those pollinators. As you can see here, butterflies also suck the nectar out. Small birds also do that. And if you think about it, when do butterflies transit from South America up here? They come up here in the spring, they go back in the fall. When does a dandelion bloom? In the spring and the fall. So to have this in their flyways, having dandelions in the flyways of the butterflies is a huge resource for them. Gives them that energy to make it to their destination. So taking those things away and putting these bare lawns really does do a detriment to our pollinators, our butterflies, our small birds. And then, of course, pigs, goats, rabbits, all kinds of small animals will actually eat the dandelions in your yard. I can't tell you the number of times I've looked out and seen a bunny chomping away on my dandelions that I thought I was going to go out and pick to make some dandelion bread or dandelion wine. And just have to share with nature, right? So food is medicine. I mentioned earlier that those Arabian physicians used the dandelion, and that they used it in the prison camp to save people's lives with the nutrients. But there's also not only nutrients for your body, but actually medicine. It will heal things for you. So if you look at this little drawing here, you can make a digestive tea out of the leaves. You can harvest the young leaves, and do harvest the young leaves. Don't do the older leaves. The older leaves can be very bitter and hard, but the young ones are actually very nice in a salad. And then, of course, the roots can be dry roasted and ground to make a caffeine substitute, much like chicory. My husband's not a fan of it. I actually mix the powder from the roots with some flowers and make a really nice tea. If I've overindulged, I had to have one of those after Thanksgiving this year. And I'm sure some other people wishes they've had some after Thanksgiving. It does have a bitter tinge, especially the older, more mature leaves, but it also has a very pleasant taste that I enjoy. So, nutrition, look at this. Look at all the nutrients that is in this one plant. It's amazing. And a lot of that, again, is that long tap root, tapping down to the soil and bringing up these nutrients with you. It's also a gentle diuretic, so it helps remove that fluid from your system. Um, it can relieve a lot of ailments. There's theories that it can save you from baldness and, it's like all the miracle drugs out there. But there's actually a lot of written proof about healing sores and toothaches and gums and weakness and depression and high blood pressure and high blood sugar. So if you think about it, we didn't have a lot of knowledge, back when the ancient people, even the immigrants to our country in the beginning on the Mayflower, about vitamins, but they knew that this was a good plant. In the eras before vitamins were known and pills were available, vitamin deficiencies killed millions, truly millions. In its time, scurvy was as a dreaded a word as AIDS is today in our country, or COVID now, right? COVID-19. But the data in the US Department shows how dandelions have helped alleviate many, many ailments. I mean, they've got detailed studies showing how what a powerhouse dandelions are. They have more vitamin A than spinach, more vitamin C than tomatoes, and they're a powerhouse of iron, calcium, and potassium. Just this past week, I actually read an article on type 2 diabetes benefits from dandelions. They have some bioactive components called chicharic acid, terataxerol, and chlorogenic acid that actually naturally lower blood sugar and stabilize blood sugar. So there's a great resource, and maybe someday our country will have dandelion pills for type 2 diabetes instead of metformin and some of these other things. Who knows? I always find it interesting. So I'm just going to let you sit here and look at this for a second and keep my mouth shut and let you just kind of look over this, and then we'll go back to talking. So look at all those nutrients, all the minerals, all the vitamins, the low calories, even has protein in it. Hardly any fat, some great fiber. This is a powerhouse food for us. Not to mention, it also is a tonic to remove toxins and a gentle diuretic. It just amazes me that we just want to destroy this and chemical it out when there's so much usefulness in this plant. Um, go right down to the root where you can improve bioflow, help with liver congestion. It's been known to cure, or not cure, but treat hepatitis symptoms. It's helped with weight loss, and there are antibodies in it that actually have been shown to kill off cancer, and like I mentioned already, buffer blood glucose levels for diabetics. But all right, so powerhouse, wonderful miracle drug, maybe. I don't know. I think it's pretty amazing, but there are things we need to worry about. Not everything is 100% perfect. So if you take a lot of dandelions products, it is a diuretic. So if you take other medication, a diuretic pushes fluid through, right? So it may push those medications through faster than they can benefit you. So I know, just like with anything, just talk to your doctors about it. It also helps your liver break down medications. So it might make some medications weaker or stronger because it breaks them down too fast. So think about that. And it can also increase the amount of stomach acid produced. So if you're somebody who takes Prilosec or, uses Tums as a dessert or Rolaids as a dessert, then maybe you need to think about lowering your dandelion consumption, especially before bed, because it will agitate those things in your stomach, the stomach acid. It also, for somebody on blood thinning products, could increase your chance of bleeding a little bit more. So avoid that. And then we don't use it much anymore, but it actually has side effects with lithium. When combined with lithium, it actually exacerbates some of the symptoms. So do your research if you're taking medications on how this can help you. Use care with it, but also know that it's a wonderful powerhouse superfood, not just for us, but for the land and for animals and insects. So how can you consume these dandelions? Here's just a few choices. Dandelion wine. I mean, what a great thing. You can drink too much dandelion wine and maybe take a dandelion tea to flush out that extra alcohol consumption and avoid a hangover. Dandelion cookies. Um, this picture here is of my bread that I make quite often. I think it's super delicious. My kids don't even put any butter or extra stuff on it. Sometimes I don't put the sugar glaze on it and they still eat it and really enjoy it. And I won't say I feel like I can defeat a minotaur right afterwards, but I definitely don't feel like I've eaten, too much sweets and desserts and feel sick to my stomach. So, dollars. Are dandelions expensive? Are they free? Yeah, you can go out in your yard and they're absolutely free as long as there's no chemicals sprayed on them. Go out into some fields and get them for free. But if you don't feel like picking and you want to go to the store and buy some, they're honestly one of the most expensive things you can buy. One shop, and I just looked this up recently, sells dried roots as a no caffeine coffee substitute for $31.75 for a pound. A lot more expensive than coffee. It's also ounce for ounce outprices prime rib, swordfish, and lobster. So pretty darn expensive. But you can find them. You can find them at farmers markets and upscale grocery stores. I've even seen them at Trader Joe's and of course the liquor store if you want to get that dandelion wine. I went to my local liquor store yesterday. I did not see any dandelion wine there, but I did go online and Google a couple of stores that do have them in the Capital District area. So you can go get yourself some dandelion wine or make it yourself. It's actually really easy to make. And if anybody wants a simple recipe, I will let you have mine. Easy, easy. I've even made dandelion ice cream and it's pretty yummy. Nice and yellow, kind of throws people off when they see it. But all that said, at the end of the day, dandelions are just plain fun. Dandelions seem like a flower earmarked for children and children at heart. In a park or a garden, they're the only flower that you can pick without anybody getting upset. Field full of dandelions is a child's playground. They can make dandelion bracelets and crowns. They can blow the dandelions and make wishes. They can figure out when it's time to go home, how many years till they get married, how many children you'll have. And of course, if you can catch a flying dandelion seed, you can make a wish. So my wish for all of you is that you look at the dandelion differently after this presentation and think about how it benefits us, the gardens, the ground, and the animals around us. And that is the end of my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you, Lauri. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. I learned that I probably shouldn't drink my dandelion wine right before bed.
I'm seeing here somebody makes a jelly out of it. That sounds awesome.
Oh, jelly. Wow.
Yeah.
I saw
My
some people
question is,
asking
how do
for
you
your
prepare it?
recipe.
I see someone mentioned that it contains less protein than something like willows. And that may be true. I don't know that for a fact. Myself, I believe you. But again, sometimes they're the first things to bloom, so it's better than nothing in the beginning for them to have something to get into their systems. Yes, honeybees are not native. I wasn't going to say anything. A lot in here about honeybees.
I
Yes,
have
so yeah,
questions
Xerxes
in the
Society.
chat.
Yep, go ahead.
I have questions in the chat if you want to look.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through them right now. A lot of honeybee questions. Are you sharing your recipes? I can share them. I can definitely share the dandelion bread recipe and my recipe for dandelion wine. I can send them to Christy. Maybe she can share them with everybody.
Be happy to.
I like this. The next agroforestry species. That would be really awesome. I would love to see that. Um, yes, there are a lot of dandelions in my no chemical lawn. I do for my neighbor's sake to make them because I think one of my neighbors came over one time and was upset because they felt like the dandelions in their yard were coming from my yard. So I do make a conscious effort to go out and pick them before they go to seed, and I use them. for cooking or for making wine. So at least they're not getting the seeds in their yard and they can't blame me completely for it. So how do you dry dandelion leaves for tea? I let them sit out for a little while in a warm sunny spot until they get the moisture out of them. And then I also do use a dehydrator or put them in the oven at 200 degrees for a couple hours, and that dries them out. The roots take longer. I tend to while they're wet and fresh, I clean them and then I shave them kind of like with a carrot peeler, just shave them like that, or chop them up into little pieces before I dry them. And then I put them in a grinder and just grind them up and I have the powder. Oh, oh, so someone just posted the pollen nutrition for dandelions. So thank you for posting that. Yep, and again, a lot of things about the bees and not to forget our native bees. And that is very true. We have a lot of native bees that do a pollination and they are very important to protect. And that's another reason to keep the chemicals off your lawn because native bees tend to lay their eggs in places where if you rake up the leaves at the end of the season or put chemicals on, you're killing them. I will leave dandelions in tree pits now. Ice cream, the ice cream recipe, yep. So, sorry to scroll. So, something about the Z word. I saw it go by. Oh, you mentioned eating seeds in ward 0. How do you eat the seeds? So it's ward Z in the prison camps and the seeds, and I eat the seeds sometimes. They're kind of hard to collect, so I don't eat them as an effort. Like I don't collect enough to put on a salad or something. But actually that little, if you look at that picture, I can go back. This picture here, these right here, this little bit right here, that's the seed. So if you grab a fuzzy, you just eat that little end off piece. It takes a little effort. But again, if you're starving to death and you're going to die, it's worth the effort, right? They just kind of taste like a seed. They don't have any special taste to them. And that's it. Any other questions? I think I've gone through. Did I answer everybody's question that was in the chat box? Oh, so are dandelions an issue in terms of taking water and nutrients from other nearby plants? No, they aren't. They actually contribute to the nutrients for plants because they bring up so much nutrients from their deep taproot that they're very, very beneficial. And again, as I mentioned earlier, they have no negative counteraction with any other plants.
Lauri, do you know, are there any dandelion cookbooks out there?
I have never seen one. That would be a really cool cookbook to do. Maybe I need to think about that
That would be
because
great.
there are some really great recipes. And like I said, the
Great.
dandelion bread, it takes a little work, I will tell you, because you have to cut all those individual little petals off. So you have to kind of hold the dandelion and cut them off and get a pile of them, and it takes 2 cups.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
So it does take some time, but it's so worth it. So yummy.
Oh, that's great. So where did you find that recipe?
It's actually, if you look on that slide, let me go back to that slide here if I can make the slide go backwards. Oops. Oh, screen sharing stopped. Sorry. I found it Googling one day.
Okay.
And that recipe is actually at holycowvegan.net.
Okay, thank you.
But I will send that link in with the recipe to everybody through you, Christy.
Okay, I appreciate it.